Hello everyone, I'm Bhavna Singh. Welcome back to Insightonomics. So let's start the topic for today without a further ado. In this video, we are going to explore the concept of compensated demand curve, also known as Hicksian demand curve, and about its definition and its derivation, its comparison with Marshalian demand curve in all the cases of normal goods, inferior goods, and given goods based on price effect and their decomposition into substitution effect. And so this video is really important. Must watch it. So let's start. So first, what is compensated demand curve and what does this depicts? Okay, compensated demand curve (CDC). Okay, so it includes the effect of substitution only. That is, change in quantity demanded as a result of change in relative prices due to the change in price. Sorry, yeah, change in actual prices, keeping purchasing power or level of utility constant. So your compensated demand curve includes the effect of substitution effect only, and this comes under the substitution effect. ये मैंने पिछले 3 से 4 वीडियो में एकदम अच्छे से क्लियर करा दिया है, तो आप पिछले वाली वीडियो देख सकते हैं. Substitution effect, इसको हम इस तरीके से भी डिनोट करते हैं. Change in QT as a result of change in relative prices. Okay, keeping your real income constant. Constant. So, substitution effect is always negative, always negative. That means always shows an inverse relation between price and quantity. Price rise होगे, commodity प्राइस फॉल होंगे, क्वांटिटी प्राइस फॉल होने की वजह से जो भी आप कमोडिटी कंज्यूम कर रहे हो वो सस्ती हो जाएगी, आप ज्यादा कंज्यूम करोगे. ओके, सो दिस इज योर सब्स्टिट्यूशन इफेक्ट. एंड जो कर्व ये सब्स्टिट्यूशन इफेक्ट को इंक्लूड करता है, एंड इंक्लूडिंग दिस सब्स्टिट्यूशन इफेक्ट जो कर्व हम ड्रॉ करते हैं, दैट इज नोन एज कॉम्पनसेटेड डिमांड कर्व. इसको कॉम्पनसेटेड क्यों कहते हैं? क्योंकि आफ्टर अ प्राइस चेंज आपकी परचेसिंग पावर भी चेंज होती है विद फॉलोइंग दैट प्राइस चेंज. और जब आप अपनी परचेसिंग पावर को कॉम्पनसेट कर देते हो, then you'll get the effect that is your substitution effect, and that's why this curve is known as compensated demand curve. Okay, and this is always negative, so the inverse relation. What a inverse this type of curve. This is our compensated demand curve. I'll denote it like this, DDC, our compensated demand curve, as it is given by J.R. Hicks, so we are also known as Hicksian demand curve. Okay, here is your price and this comes your quantity. So overall effect is always negative. Okay, so we got this compensated demand curve. Okay, this is the definition of this compensated demand curve. Now we'll look for the comparison of the demand curve with the decomposition of price effect into substitution and income effect. First, we'll look this scenario in case of normal goods. In case of normal goods, your entire price effect is negative. That is, price and commodities will move in negative direction, opposite direction. Price rise हो रहे हैं, Q कम होगा, price कम हो रहा है, Q बढ़ेगा. They are moving in opposite direction. That's why this effect is negative. And your substitution effect is also negative always. So this is same. Price and quantity will move in different direction. And income effect. But in case of normal goods, your income effect is always also negative. So the scenario will remain the same. And we know price effect is the sum of substitution effect and income effects, right? So now we have to put these effect on a graph. We'll explore it using graph. So first let's say आपके प्राइस px थे, ओके, तो आप जो है इतना यूनिट्स कंज्यूम कर रहे थे. आप इस पॉइंट पे थे, आपके पास एक पॉइंट था एंड आप ये x1 यूनिट कंज्यूम कर रहे थे, ओके. हियर वी आर शोइंग दैट प्राइस इफेक्ट एंड द डिकम्पोजिशन, जो इससे पहली वाली वीडियोस में हम लोगों ने हिक्स एंड स्लस्की वाले अप्रोच में देखा था. सेम वही चीज है एंड उसी से हम लोग डिराइव कर रहे हैं अपने डिमांड कर्व, बोथ दीज मार्शलियन डिमांड कर्व एज वेल एज द हिक्सियन डिमांड कर्व, ओके. एंड उसी बेसिस पे आई विल डिपिक्ट द नेम सेम लाइक x1, x2 एंड x3. ओके, वी गॉट दिस वन पॉइंट. अभी क्या हुआ, आपके प्राइस फॉल किए, लेट्स से यहाँ पे प्राइस फॉल हो गए दिस मच, प्राइस फॉल हुआ. अब क्या करोगे, बेस्ड ऑन दिस नेगेटिव प्राइस इफेक्ट क्वांटिटी जो है आप कंज्यूम ज्यादा करोगे. सपोज यू आर कंज्यूमिंग x2, आपको ये पॉइंट मिल गया एट दिस पॉइंट कि जब आपके प्राइस px डेस हुए आप x2 यूनिट्स जो है कंज्यूम कर रहे हो. व्हेन यू कनेक्ट दीज टू पॉइंट्स you will get your uncompensated or the Marshalian demand curve. Let me use different color. Okay, when you connect these points, you will get your Marshalian demand curve. I'll denote it like DD. DD is your Marshalian demand curve. Okay, that includes both the effects, price substitution effect as well as income effect. Now we'll decompose it. As we know, substitution effect is negative and your overall price effect is the sum of these two effects. So substitution effect must be less than your income effect. से कम होगा तो मतलब substitution effect की वजह से change आएगा from x1 to x2, but x2 से कम आएगा. Let's say this point you will get. So substitution के effect की वजह से आया movement from x1 to x3. तो at price px dash आप क्या units consume कर रहे हो, x3. You will get this new point here. Now connect this point, the movement from px to px dash at x3. When you connect these dots, you will get your compensated demand curve. This is your compensated demand curve. Before the price change, आपका substitution effect और price income effect दोनों ही zero था before the price change. तो आप x1 unit the price change, आप कितना consume कर रहे हो, total x2. Entire effect is this x1 to x2 is your entire price effect, and your price effect is the sum of substitution effect and income effect. So your substitution effect must be lesser than your price effect. That's why we got this x3 in between this x1 and x2. And finally we got our compensated demand curve. We'll denote it like small d. So small dd is your compensated demand curve. So here जब आपके प्राइस px थे आप इतना कंज्यूम कर रहे थे, अभी आप कितना कंज्यूम कर रहे हो, much. Okay, purple line is your compensated demand curve. Okay, that includes the effect of substitution only. So in this case your income effect is zero just because you are keeping your purchasing power constant. So when you keep your purchasing power constant, so there will be no effect on quantity demanded for that change in purchasing power. So entire effect will be substitution effect. But in case of Marshalian demand curves, you includes both the effects. That is, your price effect include both the effects, substitution as well as income effect. That's why it is bit flatter than this compensated demand curve. Okay. So in case of CDC, compensated demand curve, your entire price effect is equals to substitution effect because your income effect is zero. But in case of uncompensated demand curve, these Marshalian ones, your price effect is equals to substitution effect plus income effect. Okay. In case of normal commodities, again in one word, compensated demand curve is steeper than the Marshalian demand curve in case of normal commodities, but both the curves are downward sloping. That depicts the negative relation between price and quantity based on the law of demand. Now we will look for the inferior good. So first let me tell you some information about this. In this case, entire price effect will be negative, but as we know substitution effect is always negative, but in this case income effect is positive, but income effect is lesser than the substitution effect, or you can say substitution effect, which is negative, dominates the income effect, which is positive, and as a result you will get the entire price effect as negative. But in case of inferior good, the Marshalian demand curve is bit steeper, is steeper than the normal goods, steeper than in case of normal goods. Okay, because in case of normal goods both the effects are negative. Okay, moving in a same direction, but in this case this is positive, this is negative, they are interacting with each other. So now draw the curves. So earlier you are having price of X, no price change, you are consuming X1 unit, you are having this point of equilibrium. But after following a price change with the fall in price, you are consuming now more of X based on the law of demand, and this movement from X1 to X2 is your price effect, and you will get new equilibrium at this point. When you connect these points, this is your E1 equilibrium, this is your E2. E1 before price change, E2 after price change. When we connect these dots, we will get our demand curve, Marshalian demand curve. Okay. So first using this, okay, so you are consuming this X1 at point E1. You are consuming X2, and but at point E2 you are consuming, sorry, you are consuming this X2. Okay, and this is your price effect, this movement. Now we have to draw an equilibrium point for the compensated demand curve that includes the effect of substitution. So as we know, substitution effect is negative as well as it is greater than income effect. So in this case, with the fallen price, quantity demanded will be more than the X2. So you will get a point something here. You will consume more X3. You will get a point something like here. This is your E3 new equilibrium as a result of substitution effect. So when we connect this point, we will get our compensated demand curve. Okay, and you are consuming this much of X3 because of, okay, X3. So the movement from X1 to X2 is your price effect. The movement from X1 to X3, this is your substitution effect. And the movement from this E3 to E2, this one is your income effect. So this is positive and this substitution effect is negative. But आप देख भी सकते हो, this movement from X1 to X3 is higher than the movement from X3 to X2. So ये आपको बता रहा है कि substitution effect is greater than income effect. So this purple line is your compensated demand curve that includes only substitution effect, and this green line is your Marshalian demand curve or the uncompensated demand curve that includes both substitution effect plus income effect. Okay. because in this case income effect is positive and substitution effect is negative, so they will cancel each other partially and you will get entire effect this much only. So in this particular case, your Marshalian demand curve is steeper than the compensated demand curve, okay, in case of inferior goods. तो आपको ये याद रखना है, ये आपके लिए पॉइंट हो गया, एक ऑब्जेक्टिव क्वेश्चन बन सकता है इस पर, तो आपको 2 पॉइंट्स मिल जाएंगे, 2 मार्क्स मिल जाएंगे। इन क्वेश्चंस आते हैं इस तरीके के। Now we'll consider the third case, given goods. So in case of given goods, this is all we get a given paradox. That is, price fall होता है, quantity demanded भी fall हो जाती है. That is, your price effect is positive in this case. There is a one-to-one positive relation between quantity demanded and price. So in this case, your effect is always negative. We know that your income effect is all positive. But in this particular case, the difference is that your income effect is way higher than your substitution effect. So overall net effect will be positive. Okay. So you'll get positive net effect. So in this case, we'll get an upward sloping demand curve. हमको क्या मिलेगा? Upward sloping demand curve मिलेगा. Okay. So again, equilibrium point. This is your PX before price change. You are consuming X1 units. Before price change, you are consuming X1 units and you get your equilibrium, suppose at this point. But after price change, because in this case the entire factor is positive, तो आप consumption कम कर दोगे with the price fall. आपके price fall हुए PX dash, आपने consumption कम कर दिया, suppose to X2. आपका नया equilibrium आया at this point. This is your E1, this is your E2. जब इन दोनों equilibrium points को connect करेंगे, we will get our Marshalian demand curve. This is our Marshalian demand curve. Marshalian demand. Okay, we'll denote it as capital DD. Okay. Now we'll look for compensated demand curve. We'll look for compensated demand curve. For that, as we know, substitution effect is negative. So with the fallen price, quantity demanded will rise. So you might get at this point, X3. Okay. So you got your new equilibrium, suppose at this point. This is your point E3. Okay. When we connect this point E1 and E3, we will get our compensated demand curve. This is our compensated demand curve. Because in this case, we includes only substitution effect. So this movement from E1 to E3 represents the substitution effect. And when we connect this point, we will get our demand curve. Okay. So at this point, we are consuming this much, this much, this much. Okay. So in this case, we are getting this inverted V shape form because as in based on the substitution effect, it is always negative. We got this downward sloping demand curve. But when we consider the overall effect, which is positive, we got this upward sloping demand curve in case of Giffen goods. That's why we called it Giffen paradox, because this is an exception to the law of demand. Based on the law of demand, demand curve is always negative, downward sloping. But in this case, demand curve is upward sloping. That's why this is called as paradox. Okay. This demand function includes both effects, but income effect is way higher than the substitution effect because the movement from X1 to X2, this movement is your price effect. Okay. Price effect. But the movement from E1 to E3, this X1 to X2 is your substitution effect. And the movement from E3 to E2 is your income effect. And you can see the direction of both the effects. Substitution effect is moving in this way and income effect is moving in this way, but income effect is higher than the substitution effect, so the net effect is positive this much, which is your price effect, because your price effect is the sum of both these effects. So you got an upward sloping Marshalian demand curve, while in all the three cases you got this downward sloping demand curve, the compensated demand curve. तो इससे अगेन आपको ये वेरीफाई होता है कि दैट सब्स्टिट्यूशन इफेक्ट इज ऑलवेज नेगेटिव, and based on the effect of income, that change in purchasing power, you will get the shape of your this nature of your demand curve. Okay, then only in case of given goods you got the upward sloping demand curve. Okay, otherwise your demand curve is always downward sloping, shows a inverse relation between price and quantity demanded. Okay, so this is it, we are done with this. Thank you so much for watching our content. If you find it helpful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe our channel. And if you had any queries and observations, please do let us know on our comment section. And you can also join us on our Telegram channel, where we'll upload all the links of the YouTube videos and also provide the PDFs and important book notes with respect to economics. Thank you.